everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome to the first episode of the Writer's Hub for the month of October here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill, and joining us today is a Wandering Scribe alumni making his second appearance back on the show. Now, for those who remember this guest, he is a native of Arizona and currently resides in Glendale with his wife, 2 kids, and 2 dogs. He's a construction worker by day and a writer by night. And writing has been a passion of his since he was a teenager, and that passion has only grown as he's grown older. The one problem he faced was that he could never finish writing a story. However, 2 years ago, in 2023, he completed the initial draft for The Rising Sun, which you can see the incredible poster behind him. And The Rising Sun is his debut novel, a 3-year passion project that is now available on Amazon. And when he isn't writing or working under the sun, he can be found spending time with his family, cheering for the Cowboys, chasing the dogs, playing video games, or spending time in the mountains and forests. And in today's Writer's Hub episode, my guest and I will be talking about the construction of the story, building the world, and touching on my guest's own personal experiences with his world building, as well as handling negative feedback, as well as more advice for authors. So, without further ado, give a huge round of applause to today's guest coming back on the show, Mr. Kevin Wayne, alias Troy Peterson. Kevin, welcome back to the show.
Hey, how you doing?
Awesome, man. I'm so excited to have you here back on the show. So, before we dive into today's topic, would you like to give people an update on what you've been up to the last time you were on the show?
Well, yeah, since, I think book 1, The Rising Sun, it came out around the same time. I think we might have done the interview maybe like 2 weeks after that one came out. Now I've been working on book 2, which I'm hoping I should have it done by the end of the year and then published early next year.
Nice.
Still working on it.
Congratulations. That's amazing to hear, man. That's amazing to hear. I know in our interview, you are very, very passionate about getting this book finished and continuing the world that you have created. And funnily enough, as I mentioned in the beginning, viewers and listeners, that is what we're going to be talking about, the building of the story, the creation of a world. And I think that is so very important, regardless of what genre you write in, whether it's fantasy, thriller, history, what have you. Building the world is a fundamental and a huge, huge importance to the atmosphere that you create, as well as the sensory details and everything like that in between, from the action, conflict, the emotions, everything. So I'm very curious, Kevin, for your book and for you as an author, what are your thoughts on that stage? Because I know every author does it very differently.
Building a world is fun. It's kind of like your own little sandbox. And like you're almost playing God pretty much. Like you make your world and then you kind of have to look at it and say, okay, so is this total fantasy, or is it kind of like based on our planet, or is it kind of like a Earth adjacent kind of thing, like similar world, similar laws of physics, natural laws that kind of goes within that. And so it's kind of cool to sit there and be like, okay, so like how big is this world? You know, you have kingdoms. Are they as big as like the US, or are they smaller? And then finding different ways to show that beyond just, you know, this kingdom is big. And then like you have to kind of go through and be like in the main kingdom within my story, they're known for storms. So if they're known for storms, you got to have at least a few storms like that are major. And it's like, okay, you know, this is a big, like you kind of have to build your world, decide what it's going to have, and then you have to kind of follow your own rules.
Yes. That is very, very true. That is very, very true. And I think when it comes to constructing the story itself, that period, it also boils back to, the very beginning, which is, crafting the outline. Are we planners or pantsers? And I definitely think as authors, it varies between, how we approach storytelling. Like for me in particular, I like to have an outline. I am a very outline oriented author. I do make changes along the way, but I like to visually see what's happening in the story, or what I imagine the story is going to be like. And for you, Kevin, would you consider yourself doing that way, or for writing something in particular, did you go the way of the pantser?
I'm kind of in between. Like I'll have like a rough outline, but it's not anything like 20 pages long. Like this is this chapter. Here's what happens. It's more, here's where I want the story to go. Here's like the major beats of each chapter, and then here's like the points we need to hit. And then how we get there changes. But sometimes I do wish I was more of an outliner, because yes and no, actually. Like in this book, I made a huge change mid-book that completely changed like the second half of the second book. And so I had to stop and spend probably a week or two kind of going through and planning out where this change would take the second half of the book.
Very true. Very, very true. And I'm kind of on the same lines when I was doing that for some of my other books, very much the same way. And, again, for all of us authors, when it comes to building the story, building the atmosphere and everything like that, it's all based upon, personal preferences and what works best for us. There's no one formula to create a story. It's all going to be very, very different. And of course, from that stage, then we go into the writing phase. And I've always been very curious about that point. I know for me, when I was writing my stories, I always had a ritual routine. I read one day, which was about 45 minutes of reading one day and writing 45 minutes. I did that for a long time, and that worked. But now I'm at a point where it's like, I can't do that anymore. And I've kind of changed how I do my ritual as a writer. I'm wondering if that's the same for you, Kevin. Did you have like a ritual that works? And what are your thoughts on authors who have like a ritual or routine that helps them with their writing process?
Yeah, I have a ritual. Usually like every night for me, it's like between 6 to about 8:30. That's kind of my writing time. Sometimes I'll get in there a little bit later, but usually that's like my author mode time. So I'll go in my office, I'll have my soda, I'll have my vape, I'll have whatever I need in there. And I'll try not to come out as much as I can. And I just try and kind of focus. Sometimes it'll be content creation for like Instagram, or even like rereading or editing. But usually like that's my time to kind of just focus.
Yeah, that's true. I also very much like you, Kevin. I also wrote. Well, for me, I used to write in the evening. I've been trying to write in the morning, but I find evenings to be very, very more relaxing time, and also a way to like de-stress the whole day just to write. And I've also met, I'm sure you probably have met other authors who probably write starting at like 4 in the morning and finish writing at around like 8, like 4 hours of writing. Like I could never do that. I can't. I like my sleep. I can't do that. I absolutely can't. But kudos to anyone that does it. That is quite the routine.
Yeah, I'm not. Well, I wake up at 4 a.m. for work, but I'm not that awake at 4 in the morning. But even then, even writing for 4 hours straight, like unless you get into like the perfect groove, it's hard to write like that. What's the word? Like continuously for that long without
Yes.
getting like distracted.
Yes. We all get distracted by something, some way or another. That always happens. And this is actually something that I want to hear your thoughts on, Kevin. I was actually talking with a good friend of mine, another author, who said that whenever she's in a writing mode, she doesn't read books. Like if she's working on like her second At the time, she was working on her second book, and she didn't want to read anything because she didn't want to influence her writing. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that and whether or not, is that a good kind of drive or mentality to have if you're working on something? Or do you think that's a rarity?
Like personally, I think it can go either way.
Mm,
Like yes, it can have an influence on you. Like for me, I don't read a ton. I have a good friend, and we're writing buddies, so we'll send each other our chapters, and I'll read her chapters. Um, and then usually I have like one book that I'm like slowly reading through.
mm,
And every once in a while, like you can kind of see some influence, but a lot of times like they're different genres. Like working on mine, I'm not going to go read Lord of the Rings, and then next thing you know, it's like there's a magic ring or like a hobbit walks in. It's like, wait a second.
right. That is very true. Yeah. I like to read now more fantasy just because my next book is not really fantasy, so I won't necessarily have to worry. But it's also nice to just escape. And I think reading does help as well because we can also use reading for research in terms of nothing like for like plot ideas, but definitely, you know, the next topic to discuss is balancing the action with the emotion because every story does have that. And I'm very curious, Kevin, for your book, Rising Sun, what were some of the books that may have, in a way, helped you understand or helped you figure out how to best approach that aspect?
You're asking the hard ones today. Um, like you can't have a book be all action.
Hmm.
You can't. I guess you could have a book be all emotion, and you could have a book be all action, but like you would have like something missing. The emotional beats of a story give that book meaning beyond the action. Like you're going to remember a fight scene, but the emotion is what's going to like resonate with you later on. It's going to like you're going to think about that fight scene, but then there's that emotional moment that you're going to kind of remember. You're going to see something in your everyday life, and it's like, oh, you know what? This kind of reminds me of that. It's the emotional moments that are going to make you that have an impact on you. You're going to think about them later. They're going to make you laugh, or they make you feel happy, or they make you cry. And that's the really nice thing about writing and reading is sometimes like you have your emotional beats within your action sequence. Like sometimes there's a deeper meaning to like a fight that's happening that adds like it gives it extra weight. Like episode 1 of Star Wars, Darth Maul against Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. Probably one of the best fight scenes of the entire saga, but at the core of it, like that battle is really, we find out later on, like that battle is essentially they're fighting for the future of Anakin.
Yes, very true. Very, very true.
So, and that's where it's fun being a writer because you can get those little moments in it that add that emotional resonance into your action that people are going to remember later on down the road.
Absolutely. You do want to balance the action with the emotional weight, the emotional conflict. And I think also conflict does not necessarily have to be like, two people fighting. Sometimes conflict could be like a heated discussion that's coming up, or maybe a meeting or something that's going to have a lot of tension. But you do want it to have that emotional balancing to it that readers can relate to, that people can resonate with. That's another thing too when it comes to building the story, understanding our audience and really building that rapport. So I'll give an example from one of my books. For Michael, that was a pretty pretty difficult book to write in the sense of I didn't want this character to die, but I wanted his story to reach a point where, it was a big emotional payoff. And there is a scene where I wrote that he drinks a drug that pretty much gives him superhuman strength and abilities, the powers of a god. But it's only for a few minutes. And the more he uses his power, the quicker his life is draining. He becomes like a skeletal version of himself towards the end of that chapter. And I was thinking at that point, it's like, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I really going to resonate this? And I did research on famous movie scenes of last stand moments to really see, okay, what did the director do to really bring out this emotion? And I used that as a basis to write the last few paragraphs for that chapter. It was a difficult chapter to write. It wasn't easy, but a lot of my readers resonate to that specific chapter. And I was wondering, Kevin, for The Rising Sun, is there a particular chapter or scene that you feel truly highlights this discussion of the conflict balance with the emotion?
Yeah, actually, in the first book, the very last chapter, like I knew going into it, like book one is very much a coming of age story. Merrick, he's the main character. He goes from age 13 at the beginning. I think at the end he's 21. And so books 2 and 3 are very much, they're darker. They're more intense. And so I needed him to kind of be like at the point where that would make sense for the readers when they come into it. And so, like there was a duel he fought about midpoint in the book. And he was he was cocky in it, but like there was honor in the fight. Like he made sure this guy who was fighting died on his feet. He gave him a sword and then he killed him. Like he gave him like an honorable end. The last fight was more like he went into it angry and then he's trying to like beat this guy down with not just like his sword, but he's like berating him, reminding him like, hey, you're not gonna win. He's trying to break him, his emotional state before he can finish him off. And he doesn't hold back.
Nice. Very,
and
very nice.
It was like what do you call it? Like a nice juxtaposition. Is that the right word? Yeah. Where it kind of like you go kind of look at one and you kind of see like where he's not the same guy anymore. After everything he's been through, like this is kind of where he's at now. And he's not afraid to be there.
Yeah. That's almost, again, kind of almost like for Michael Last Angel, which actually have version right here. So again, very much the same thing for your book, The Rising Sun. For Last Angel, what was it? I want to also have him go through a growth as well and have him be, very, very different, that he's not the same person anymore. And I think readers like that, what's the word? Growth in characters, because it really does show that these are relatable, that these are believable people, even if some of them may be more fanciful than others. And that goes down to, just understanding our audience and understanding, who we want to write for, and really making a story that truly, truly, either inspires them or leaves them with a promise. And I would like to talk to you about that aspect also when it comes to building the story, which is understanding the audience. Now, I may have asked you this in our interview a while back, but when you were writing The Rising Sun, did you have a good idea at the time of who your audience was? And looking back on your career as an author and looking back at The Rising Sun, do you feel that has helped you as an author now going into book 2?
I think that took me a while to figure out my audience. Like I knew going into it, like this is not a book that I want them reading in school. Like I knew that going in, and so like as I've gotten into book two, like I've kind of like I want this, like I guess mainstream fantasy, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've slowly introduced new. Like book one is fantasy light. Book two is definitely a little bit heavier. Book three will have a little bit more, and so you kind of build on that. And there's like that unspoken rule where you can't. I can't remember the actual what the rule is called, but you can't mention something and have it not like not
Oh,
have
and not
some
have
sort
it
of
used in the
payoff
story.
later. Like you can't just have like a word and be like, yeah, there's this, and then there's nothing to go along with it.
Yes, very, very true. What is that theory? That it's a movie term. I think it's like what Hitchcock's Gun or something, where if you
Maybe.
introduce it in the beginning of the film, you better use it towards the
Yeah.
end, which you're absolutely right. As authors, we don't want to introduce something that's probably not going to be in
Yeah.
the first book, maybe introduced later in the second or third book. And that comes down to understanding the world building of how much of the world do we want to introduce. Now, again, Kevin, for the Rising Sun, how much of the world did you introduce in the Rising Sun, and how much of that are you introducing now in book two?
It's a major difference. Like book one, they spend a majority of the time is spent in like one general area. They travel a little bit, but it's mostly in like one area. And then book two, you pretty much travel all the way across one kingdom, and then you're all the way through another kingdom. And so to kind of like convey the scale of it, like when I was planning out act two of the book, I had to kind of sit there and be like, okay, so this kingdom spans a continent. How long is it going to take them to get an army north to south? And I sat there and had to research, okay, how many miles can they travel by horse doing this? If it was by sea, it's like, all right, 30 days to make it, you make it more believable and make it more make sense. And then like the world kind of grows, and it's like, we briefly mentioned this in book one, and then now book two, they actually get to see it. While also adding new stuff, but at the same time trying to not create a plot hole.
Right. Absolutely. I definitely think, maps are important in stories to like at least show, but you don't have to like tell the reader what's happening in the world, like for the main character. And what I mean by that is you can still show a map of the world, or if you made a map of your story and want to introduce it, absolutely go for it. But know from the get-go how much of this is being introduced to the reader from the character's perspective. How much are you willing to allow us to see into this world you have created? And I definitely think world building is probably one of the most challenging things, because you want to create something that's going to be inviting, engaging, and appeal to the senses, but also make it very gripping. And that can be very difficult. We can add all the lore about the continent, but to make it believable, to really imagine ourselves in it, that takes a lot of skill, hard work, and dedication. And I know for my books, I am probably if not one of the most detailed in my storytelling that I know of out of my group of friends here. But I know there are other people who are able to do it much better than me, and I learn from them about how do I say the exact same thing, but in a way which is better. So for you, Kevin, for the Rising Sun, how did you approach that aspect of building the story from the atmosphere and really making sure what you wrote appealed to the senses for the reader?
Building the atmosphere can be hard because you don't want to, what's the word? Like you're not really going to find like a happy-go-lucky slice of life kind of story in like some grim, dark fantasy setting. And so you kind of have to, I mean, you can, but you kind of have to like adjust to kind of fit within that.
Mhm.
And there's like little ways you can kind of tell, like little, like, you know, you use the rain to kind of, trying to figure out where I'm going with this one. Like when something major happens, you know, maybe there's a big storm that comes in and it kind of creates an ominous feeling, or there's things that like make sense to a reader, like a pale white horse.
Right.
You know, everyone, well, not everyone, but anyone who knows the Bible knows a pale white horse means death.
Yes.
And so, like in your story, if like there's a major storm and then there's a pale white horse running through it, like that can kind of signal to your readers, like, you know, something major is going to happen without you spelling it out.
Mm-hmm.
Or you build up to it. There's the ticking clock where you kind of feel that little tick. Or you kind of play with time a little bit where it like jumps from, like in book 2, I have one chapter where it's a battle, but it's 2 different fights going on at the same time. So in the first one, they're breaking into this castle, and then there's a bell ringing, and the scene immediately jumps to the other fight where the bell starts ringing, and then their fight starts, and it kind of switches back and forth. And there's little tells that you can catch, and you kind of follow those back and forth throughout the battle.
Yes. Again, you said a lot of great things, Kevin. And I like how you mentioned, going back to what you said about the pale white horse, like that image alone, you don't need to like give us a lot of descriptions to it, like describing the horse itself. You can literally just write, you know, in the eye of the storm or in the chaotic storm, there was a white horse. Because you know there's no way in the natural world is a regular animal going to be in this storm. So we can automatically get a sense of foreboding with just this visual scene of this white horse and how it is described. And again, it is trial and error when it comes to the world building. Sometimes start off small, and sometimes we'll start off big. Now, with that also in mind, I also would like to hear your thoughts on this, Kevin. Of like, how do you approach world building in a sense? You start outward and go inward, or from inward go outward? And what I mean by that is, as one of my guests said, let's say you have again a map of your world and you are just building inward from this place. Like you already know the size of the continent from like the map, but now you're just filling it in. As opposed to, let's say you're starting off in this person, you're seeing through his eyes, and he's like, oh, okay, what's this world? Like you're getting bits and pieces, and then you're expanding outward of, you know, what exactly the world is now. By the time of the book ends, you now have a visual idea of what this world looks like. And I'd like to hear again your thoughts on this.
I'll agree. I would definitely say it's easier to start when you start small and then expand it. It You can start big. I mean, like the father of fantasy, he literally created, you know, a world, a language, a whole Bible, you know, for his
Mm-hmm.
world. But for most people, it's a lot easier if you start small and you give them little bits, and then as your character is experiencing that world, he or she can kind of see like the different places and kind of experience it, and you end up kind of growing with that character. And then it's also easier to remember events instead of like you mentioned some place far off in the beginning of the story and nothing happens there for another 200 pages. but then in the book, then your character goes to that place. Then it kind of it builds that connection. Now they have an event associated with that place beyond. Oh, there's the city, on the East Coast. It's New York.
Mm-hmm. That is, again, very well true. Very well true. And now the next part, which I'm very good to hear your thoughts on, and I think I mentioned this before, is when it comes to world building and we share our ideas with other authors, sometimes with readers, we also have to understand that just because we create something that we think it's enjoyable, it's not a guarantee that other people are going to find it interesting as well. And that is the truth of the matter when it comes to writing stories and building these worlds. That there is no guarantee that people are going to absolutely like and enjoy it. And I would like to hear from your own personal experiences, Kevin, of how people reacted to your world building and the world you created in The Rising Sun, and what ultimately your advice would be to others who are just in this stage of the process, building the world and crafting the story.
I think as a writer, you almost have to have thick skin if you want to be published, especially in today's world where everyone is online. You can go and post something on Reddit, and all of a sudden you have 3,000 people replying, and half of them are negative. So you kind of have to have thick skin and be able to accept that criticism and kind of look at it. But then at the same time, you need to be able to look at what they're saying and see if there's something constructive you can pull out of it. Maybe they had maybe they wrote a 2-page review and it was terrible, but they had one line where it was like, if you would have made this change and kind of tweaked this a bit, it would have made way more sense. And you can kind of look at them and be like, okay, well, I actually can kind of see their point. There's always something that you can gain from negative feedback. You might not enjoy hearing it, and it might hurt your feelings, but you kind of learn from that, and then you can kind of tweak it and kind of see what you need to improve on. There's some stuff where you're like, no, I'm not gonna, change that. I like how it is.
Again, very, very true. And for us as authors, feedback is very, very important. We want to continue to grow and learn as authors, but we also have to realize that when it comes to our stories, no one knows it better than us. And yes, we do want to market to our readers. We do want to create stories that are engaging, that are immersive, but we also shouldn't write stories just to write it for like the clout or try to be something similar. Because we shouldn't try to be like that. We should try to focus on highlighting our voice and showcasing who we are as authors and how we approach the world building, how we approach storytelling, how we approach character development, character bios, all that stuff. That should be on our own. Is it difficult? Absolutely. Is it tedious? Very. But we enjoy it. Absolutely enjoy crafting stories and telling these incredible, incredible tales. And there was another thing I did want to hear your thoughts on, Kevin, in terms of, the world building and everything. And it ties down into, again, how much we want to give away to the readers. Because I'm sure when you were writing The Rising Sun, you probably wanted to showcase everything about the world, but also realize that if you wanted to be successful, you had to know when to stop. And also realize if people wanted, or if I wanted, I should save enough of the world building for the second book, and making sure that what I have given my reader is satisfying. So for The Rising Sun in particular, Kevin, how did you ensure that when crafting the story, the ending that you arrived upon was going to be satisfying or was already satisfying, but also you knew when to stop writing as to give you some breathe way to really flesh out not just the character, but also the world, because the world is itself a character in the book.
Yeah. Ending the book is really hard. And I actually, like, when I originally wrote the first one, I had like, I think there was like the climax, and then it kind of winded down. Then there were like 4 chapters that originally planned. I was like, okay, we'll kind of end it with this, kind of calm down, and then we'll kind of slowly set up book 2. And then I was writing them, and I was kind of reading from the climax to those, and it's like, this makes no sense. Like, in the grand scheme of things, like this, I ended up moving some of those to the beginning of book 2, where it made a little more sense. It kind of gave the book a little bit of a calmer start, but it didn't make sense. And then I was like, okay, so if that doesn't work, you kind of have to sit there and think and kind of plan it out. And it's like, okay, so where do you want your characters to be at? Not just like emotionally, but also physically. Like, if you're setting up like another book, it's like, I knew at the end of book 1, I needed Merrick to be in the capital, and then Anthony, his adopted brother, to be on the road, because that was going to be a central thing in book 2.
Right.
So you kind of have to do like some setup and kind of, make sure like the pieces are in place for the next book, unless it's like, you're going to like a 10-year time jump.
Yes. And I think another thing we haven't touched on yet, but I think we've hit a little bit of it or hinted at it, is the characters. The characters are probably, next to the world building, another powerful aspect of the creation of a story. And for characters in our stories, we wanted them to not be archetype characters, definitely have some inspiration drawn from them, but also, what was it? Making sure they're authentic, that it makes sense. Now, most people think, well, why wouldn't they be authentic to the story? I mean, you wrote them in the story. That is true. But as I was talking with a lot of people on the show as of recently about this particular question, it really got me thinking, because most characters are either trope-based characters. They exist for sake of being the trope. But when it comes to story building and world building and creation, we also have to think of, okay, does it make sense for a character like this to exist in the world that I have created? If so, then we're good. If not, we have to go back to the drawing board, because we are ourselves breaking our own rule that we set up in our story. And is there a character like that in The Rising Sun that went through those series of changes and revisions to the point that you cannot see them anywhere else outside The Rising Sun?
Um, I don't think I could see any of like the main cast outside of it, because they're not like set. What's the word here? Like, yeah, they kind of adhere to some of the basic archetypes, but they exist within that world. You have Merrick, who he's a warrior. He knows he's a man of war. That's what he is.
Mm.
And then there's Marion, who is his love interest, but she's also a badass archer. Best archer in the kingdom. There's his adopted brother Anthony. There's his sister, and they all kind of fit within the story. And I mean, I guess technically, yeah, I could write another book set in a different world, and yeah, these characters could show up then. But it would be really weird seeing Merrick, like, I mean, I guess he could go be in 300.
That's true.
Or some like action book, but I don't really see Merrick. Like, he wouldn't fit within like Lord of the Rings. If he showed up there, it'd be like, no, you're too dark and brooding for this one.
Yeah, that is true. He's too much of a more modern fantasy to exist in Lord of the Rings. It's almost like saying Geralt of Rivia in Lord of the Rings. Though honestly, I would not be opposed to seeing a story like that, or the character like that. Actually, in fact, I think there is a character which is similar to Geralt of Rivia, and that is, of course, Andy Peliquin's book, The Assassin, which very much reads like a Wild Hunt story or the Witcher universe, except it's not the Witcher. The main character is known as the Hunter, which, again, that just goes to show how we take our own inspirations, our own passions, and apply it to our own storytelling. And again, as we mentioned earlier, that sometimes we don't read books in case we get inspired by something, but on some off chances we will, and sometimes we'll also be influenced by TV. So, for you, Kevin, when it came to The Rising Sun, were there any film or media inspirations that help either bring the world to life or some of the characters to life?
Oh, definitely. Like you're all like you like when you write, you kind of pull like not pull ideas, but you have your inspirations. You have those things you really like, and sometimes those kind of get mixed in. Like I'm a big fan of like Spartan and Greek history, and so the primary kingdom Typhonos, they're very much Spartan based. Not in its entirety, but they definitely pull a lot of themes from Spartan lore and history.
Nice. Very,
And
very
then
nice.
it's very much like I'm a huge fan of John Wayne. And so like their work ethic is very much like a John Wayne attitude and work ethic. And so I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's really hard to not have some sort of influence, something that's influenced you or like you really enjoy kind of resonate in your work a little bit at least.
Very true. Very, very true. And before we end this incredible discussion, Kevin, I'd like to ask you one final thing, which is, of the many topics and the many workshops that have been on this particular discussion, for you and your experiences, what would be like your piece of advice to authors who are struggling with this aspect of building the story in terms of, creating the world, or very least making sure that it is authentic to them, but also knowing the genre that they're writing into?
I think for stuff like that, if you're having trouble building, you need to look at the world your story is going to exist in.
Mm.
Is it like some high fantasy story that is, going to have all these different magical species, magical creatures, magic, and has all that? Then, you can be a little more whimsical with your world. If it's more, it's more grounded, then your world needs to be a little more grounded. But at the end of the day, like the biggest thing that anyone can do is to just work at it. They can take all the classes, they can read all the self-help books, but if they don't go in and put in that effort and spend the time, like I can sit here and think, I want to write a book, but if I don't go and put in, so many hours a week, it's never going to happen.
No.
You got to put in the time, put in the effort, and then slowly build it. You're like, yeah, we have there's some people who, like they'll have an idea and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm going to write this book. What's her name? The lady who wrote Twilight, I can't remember her name.
Oh, yes. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but I think she said she wrote all of the first Twilight book in like 5 months. Like 5 or 6 months. It was like a crazy fast pace. And I remember thinking, wow, that's like, to me, that still seems insane.
Yeah, that is a little insane.
But the amount of times that like you have writers like that, unless they're like, Stephen King, who have written so many books, like they know exactly what they're going to do when they sit down and write it. It's going to take time. You have to put in the work. A lot of times you have to sit there and do research.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's been nights when my entire 2 hours is me looking up stuff and trying to get all the details right. That way it sounds believable. And so you just got to put in the time, put in the effort, do your research, and then slowly build it, and then be okay with like, I may have to tweak this to make this part work.
Nice. Very true. Very, very true, Kevin. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude another amazing episode here of the Writers Hub. A huge thank you to my friend Kevin Wayne for coming back on the show. Always a pleasure having him back. Now, Kevin, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out? And where can people buy a copy of The Rising Sun?
They can find it right now. It's on Amazon, and then they can find me on Instagram. And right now, I do believe, because I still haven't changed it in about a month, the ebook is still 99 cents for America. I think it's a little bit more in the other countries.
Awesome. I will link that down below in the description of this video. And if you'd like to see Kevin's first appearance here on the show, I'll also tag it right here. Go and check it out. And as always, viewers and listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another amazing episode here, the Writers Hub on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. A huge thank you to my friend Kevin for coming back on the show. Always a pleasure again. And as always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date with all new episodes coming out later this month. And until next time, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. We'll see you all next time.